My life with Leo felt like it had been pulled directly from the pages of a fairy tale. Every morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee he'd made for me and the sight of his perfect, easy smile. He was the kind of man you only read about in books or see in movies. He was handsome, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, and he was brilliant, working a high-powered job in the city that he was incredibly good at. But most importantly, he was deeply unconditionally in love with me. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Our apartment was a beautiful sun-drenched space overlooking the city, and now it was completely covered in the wonderful chaos of wedding planning. So, are we thinking classic roses or something a little more modern, like calla lilies? I asked, holding up two different floral magazines. We were sitting on the plush cream rug in our living room, surrounded by swatches of fabric, venue brochures, and cake flavor samples. Leo looked up from the spreadsheet he was meticulously organizing for our budget. He didn't even hesitate. "Whichever one makes you happier, Clara," he said, his voice warm and sincere. He reached over and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. "This is your day. I just want to see you walk down that aisle smiling. That's the only part that matters to me." My heart did a little flutter, the way it always did. That was Leo. Always selfless, always focused on my happiness. We had been together for 2 wonderful years, and in a few short months, I would be his wife. Everything was falling into place so perfectly, it almost felt too good to be true. It was a beautiful, intricate puzzle, and every piece was fitting together seamlessly, except for one big jagged piece that didn't fit anywhere: his parents. From the day we met, Leo's family was a forbidden topic. In the beginning, I asked about them innocently, the way anyone would. "What are your parents like?" I'd wondered aloud on our third date. His charming smile had tightened just a fraction, the light in his eyes dimming for a split second before returning. "It's a complicated story," he'd said, his tone shifting from light-hearted to serious. "They're very traditional, very controlling. They had my whole life planned out for me, right down to taking over the family business." He shook his head, looking down at his hands. "When I decided to follow my own path and go into finance, they didn't take it well. We had a huge fight, and they basically told me I was no longer their son." I remembered reaching across the table and taking his hand, my heart aching for the pain he must have felt. "Oh, Leo, that's awful. I'm so sorry." He'd squeeze my hand back, his smile returning, though it didn't quite reach his eyes that time. "Don't be. It was a long time ago. My life is so much better now, especially since I met you." And that was it. He had presented it as a closed chapter, a sad story from his past that had no bearing on our bright future. I accepted it, wanting to protect him from any more pain. But as our wedding day grew closer, the closed chapter refused to stay shut. My mother, in her usual organized fashion, was helping me with the guest list. "I'll need an address for Leo's parents, sweetie," she said over the phone one afternoon. "I want to make sure their invitation is sent out with the first batch." My stomach dropped. "Oh, they won't be coming, Mom?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Not coming? Clara, what on earth do you mean? It's their only son's wedding." I tried to explain Leo's story, but it sounded thin and strange even to my own ears. That evening, I knew I had to bring it up with him. I found him in the kitchen, making our favorite pasta dish. I approached him cautiously, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind. "Hey," I said softly, "my mom was asking for your parents' address for an invitation." I felt his whole body go stiff. He stopped stirring the sauce and stood perfectly still. When he finally turned around, his face was like a stone mask. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, hard look I'd never seen before. "No," he said, and the word was as sharp and final as a slamming door. "I've told you, Clara, they are not a part of my life. That means they are not coming to our wedding." The intensity in his voice startled me. "I know, but I just... Leo, it's a wedding. It's supposed to be about family coming together. Don't you think, even after all this time, they'd want to be there? That maybe this could be a chance to fix things?" He took a step closer, his eyes dark and serious. "You don't understand the kind of people they are. They don't fix things, they break them. Their presence would be a dark cloud over the happiest day of our lives. I will not allow their bitterness and negativity to ruin what we have. He saw the hurt look on my face, and his expression softened slightly. He took my hands in his grip firm. Clara, I love you more than anything. I need you to trust me on this. This is the one thing I will not bend on. My one and only rule is that my past stays in the past. Can you please accept that for me? For us? Looking into his pleading eyes, what else could I say? I love this man with all my heart. If this was the price of his happiness, of our happiness, then I would pay it. Okay, Leo, I whispered, nodding. I'm sorry, I trust you. I won't bring it up again. He pulled me into a hug, burying his face in my hair. Thank you, he murmured, his voice thick with relief. He went back to being the sweet, loving man I knew, and the rest of the evening was perfect. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me, I couldn't shake a feeling of deep unease. Our life together felt like a beautiful, magnificent house, but he had just shown me a room in the very center of it, a room he insisted on keeping locked forever. And for the first time, I was terrified to wonder what might be hiding on the other side of that door. For a few weeks, I let it go. I buried my unease under a mountain of wedding tasks, convincing myself that Leo's one rule was a small, understandable scar from a painful past. I threw myself into the joy of it all, focusing on the future we were building, not the past he wanted to keep locked away. We picked out our wedding bands, simple gold rings that felt solid and real in my hands. We finalized the menu, laughing as we debated over chocolate or vanilla cake. Life was good. The perfect, loving Leo was back, and the cold stranger I had glimpsed in the kitchen faded like a bad dream. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. The illusion shattered on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was working on a surprise for Leo, a photo slideshow to play during our wedding reception. My mom had given me a huge box of my own childhood photos, me with missing teeth, me at my school graduation, me on family vacations. It was a beautiful timeline of my life. My mom had casually remarked, "You should get some of Leo's baby pictures to include. Everyone loves seeing the groom in a diaper." I laughed it off, but the idea stuck. Of course, I couldn't ask him directly. That door was closed and bolted. But then I remembered something. On the top shelf of his closet, behind a stack of sweaters, was a large cardboard box with college stuff scrawled on the side in faded marker. I reasoned with myself that a few innocent pictures of him as a kid couldn't possibly violate his rule. It wasn't about his parents. It was about him. With a little thrill of guilty excitement, I pulled a chair into the closet and carefully lifted the heavy box down. It smelled like dust and old paper. I sat on the floor and began to sift through its contents, uncovering old textbooks, a worn university sweatshirt, and a stack of notebooks filled with his neat handwriting. And then at the very bottom, my fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. It was a small, dark leather photo album. My heart began to beat a little faster. This was more than just a few loose photos. This was a collection, a story. With trembling hands, I opened it. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. Pictures of a younger Leo with his friends, grinning at parties, wearing a graduation cap and gown. He looked so happy and carefree. I smiled, feeling a wave of affection. But then I turned a page and the air left my lungs. It was a family portrait, a vibrant, sunlit photograph of Leo, probably around 17 or 18, standing between a man and a woman. He had his arms thrown around both of their shoulders, pulling them into a happy, laughing hug. The man, who had to be his father, was looking at Leo with an expression of such overwhelming pride and love that it almost hurt to look at. The woman, his mother, was beautiful. She was leaning her head against Leo's, her eyes sparkling with pure joy. They didn't look bitter. They didn't look controlling. They looked like a family that adored each other, a family without a single crack in its foundation. I couldn't reconcile this image with the one Leo had painted. This picture told a story of love, not rejection. I felt a confusing mix of emotions, sadness for the happiness they had lost, and a growing, gnawing suspicion. Holding the album, I walked out into the living room. Leo was on the couch, reading a book, a picture of perfect relaxation. Leo, look what I found, I said, my voice softer than I intended. I tried to sound casual, like it was a fun, nostalgic discovery. He looked up, his warm smile ready. But when his eyes landed on the open album in my hands, the smile evaporated. It was like a light switch being flicked off, plunging the room into a sudden icy chill. He slowly stood up, his body rigid. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was dangerously quiet, stripped of all its usual warmth. It was the voice I'd heard in the kitchen. "In the box from your closet," I explained, my own voice starting to tremble. "I was just looking for some old photos for the wedding slideshow. Leo, you all look so happy here. I don't understand." He moved towards me with quick, sharp steps and snatched the album from my hands. He snapped it shut with a loud crack that made me flinch. "I told you to leave it alone, Clara," he said, his voice a low hiss. "I told you. Why can't you just respect that?" He wasn't yelling, but the contained fury in his eyes was more frightening than any shout. He looked at me as if I were a complete stranger who had just betrayed him. "I'm sorry, I just thought—" "Just drop it," he cut me off, turning his back on me to shove the album back into the closet, hiding it away like a piece of forbidden evidence. The rest of the day passed in a thick, suffocating silence. He was physically there, but the man I loved was gone, replaced by this cold, distant person who wouldn't look at me. Later that evening, desperate to escape the tension, I went into our bedroom to read. A few minutes later, I heard him on the phone in the hallway. His voice was a low murmur, but the tone was unmistakable. It was that same cold, commanding tone he had used with me. Compelled by a dread I couldn't name, I crept to the door and pressed my ear against the cool wood. "I don't care what you think you need," he was saying, his voice sharp and impatient. "The arrangement is not up for discussion. You will get what I give you, and that's final." There was a pause, and I could faintly hear a muffled, frantic-sounding voice on the other end. "Don't even think about it," Leo continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You know what will happen if you do." My blood ran cold. He didn't sound like a son who had been hurt by his parents. He sounded like a warden speaking to his prisoners. A moment later, I heard the click of the phone hanging up. The bedroom door opened and he walked in, that perfect, charming smile plastered back on his face as if nothing had happened. "Hey, honey, ready to call it a night?" he asked, his voice dripping with its usual affection. I just stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. The image of the happy family in the photograph was flashing in my mind, colliding with the cold, cruel voice I had just heard through the door. And in that moment, I knew with terrifying certainty that the story he had told me was a lie. And the truth was something much, much darker. The days that followed were a master class in deception, both his and mine. Leo, sensing he had pushed me too far, became the model fiancé. He was overly attentive, leaving little notes for me by the coffee machine, bringing home my favorite takeout without me asking, and constantly telling me how much he loved me. It was a suffocating, cloying sweetness, a desperate attempt to paint over the crack I had discovered in our perfect picture. A part of me, the part that loved him so desperately, wanted to believe it. I wanted to forget the coldness in his eyes and the cruelty in his voice, to accept his apologies and pretend that everything was fine. But I couldn't. Another part of me, a new part that was colder and more watchful, knew he was lying. I played my role just as well as he played his. I smiled. I kissed him back. I talked about the wedding. But inside, I was holding my breath. The happy, trusting foundation of our relationship had been replaced by a thin sheet of ice, and I was terrified of what was swimming in the dark water beneath. Our beautiful apartment no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage, and we were both just actors reading our lines. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't stand beside him at the altar, promising to love and trust him forever, when I knew, deep in my gut, that I couldn't trust a single word he said about the most fundamental part of his life. I needed proof. I needed something solid and undeniable, something that wasn't just a gut feeling or a misinterpreted phone call. The need for truth became an obsession, a constant low-grade hum in the back of my mind. My opportunity came on a Tuesday evening. Leo had a late meeting at work, a dinner with an important client he couldn't miss. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the steady hum of the refrigerator. It was the night we had set aside to go over our wedding budget. The joint bank account we had opened felt like the perfect justifiable excuse. I wasn't snooping, I told myself. I was being financially responsible, but my hands were clammy as I opened my laptop at the dining room table. I logged into our joint account, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I scrolled through the list of recent transactions, my eyes scanning the familiar names of our vendors. There was the deposit for the reception hall, the payment to the florist, the charge for my wedding dress. It all looked perfectly normal. I kept scrolling, going back month by month, my manufactured excuse of checking the budget, wearing thin. I was searching for something, I just didn't know what. And then I saw it. It was a payment for $450 made on the first of the month. The recipient was listed as Willow Creek Properties. I stared at the name, my brow furrowing. I had never heard of it. I scrolled back another month. There it was again, on the first. And the month before that, and the month before that. It was a recurring monthly payment, steady and consistent. It wasn't a wedding expense. It wasn't for anything in our life that I knew about. A cold prickle of unease crawled up my spine. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I typed Willow Creek Properties into a search engine. The results came up instantly. It was a small property management company based in a rural town, also named Willow Creek, located about a 3-hour drive west of the city. A tiny forgotten town in the middle of nowhere. A town Leo had never ever mentioned. Why was he sending money to a place like this every single month? A wild idea, a terrifying guess that felt both completely insane and absolutely right, began to form in my mind. What if this was it? What if this was where they were? See, my hands were shaking now. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to take a step that would change everything. I navigated to the property company's website. It was simple, with a basic login portal for tenants. Every click of the mouse felt like a betrayal, but I couldn't stop. I entered our shared email address, the one we use for bills. For the password, my mind raced. What would he use? On a desperate hunch, I typed in the name of the golden retriever he had as a kid, Buddy 1 and 23. I held my breath and clicked enter. The page loaded. I was in. My heart leaped into my throat. I felt a dizzying wave of both triumph and terror, and there it was, right on the dashboard page, a rental agreement. The tenant's name was listed as Leo, but the property address was not in the city. It was for a small 2-bedroom house on a road called Old Mill Lane in Willow Creek. I stared at the address on the screen, the letters blurring through the tears that had started to form in my eyes. This was it, the key to the locked room. All the pieces began to click together in a horrifying picture, the happy family in the photo, the cold, threatening voice on the phone, and now the secret house in the middle of nowhere. In that moment, a decision was made. It wasn't even a choice, it was a necessity. I couldn't ask him. He would just lie again, his face a perfect mask of concern, and I would be left drowning in my own doubt. I had to see it for myself. I had to go to Willow Creek. I had to find that house. I grabbed a pen and a stray piece of paper, and with a hand that trembled uncontrollably, I wrote down the address, the secret that I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, would either save me or destroy me completely. The lie felt heavy and unnatural on my tongue. I'm going to go visit Jenna for the day, I said to Leo the next morning, naming my old college roommate who lived a couple of hours away in the opposite direction of Willow Creek. I busied myself making coffee, unable to meet his eyes. We haven't had a girls' day in forever. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "That sounds nice, honey. You deserve a break from all this wedding stress." He kissed my cheek, his touch warm and familiar. For a terrifying second, my resolve wavered. His embrace felt like home. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all a huge paranoid misunderstanding. Maybe I should just stay here in this beautiful apartment with this man who loved me and forget all about the secrets and the lies. But then I remembered the terror in the eyes of the man in the photograph, the cold command in Leo's voice, and the secret address burning a hole in my purse. The warmth of his hug suddenly felt like a cage. I gently pulled away. "Yeah, it'll be fun," I said, forcing a brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "I'll probably be back late, so don't wait up for dinner." "All right, drive safe," he said, giving me one last unsuspecting smile. That smile, the one that used to make my heart soar, now just made my stomach clench with guilt and fear. I grabbed my keys and practically fled the apartment before he could see the truth in my eyes. The drive out of the city was a blur of familiar landmarks that now seemed alien and distant. With every mile that passed, the polished, sophisticated world Leo and I inhabited began to dissolve behind me. The sleek glass and steel towers of the skyline shrank in my rearview mirror, replaced by the endless flat expanse of the highway. The six-lane road, usually bustling with life, eventually narrowed to 4 lanes, then 2. The pristine suburban neighborhoods, with their manicured lawns and identical houses, gave way to smaller, more worn-down towns. Gas stations had peeling paint, and diners had faded signs that flickered unsteadily. It felt like I was driving backwards in time, leaving the bright modern world behind for a place that had been forgotten. After almost 2 hours, I turned off the main highway, following the directions on my phone's GPS. The voice, usually so calm and authoritative, now felt like a guide leading me into some dark, unknown territory. The road became a winding country lane, flanked by dense, overgrown woods. Sunlight struggled to pierce through the thick canopy of leaves, casting strange, shifting shadows across the cracked asphalt. I passed rusted mailboxes leaning at odd angles and long gravel driveways that disappeared into the trees, leading to houses I couldn't see. There was a profound and unsettling silence out here, broken only by the crunch of my tires on the road. Finally, the GPS instructed me to turn onto Old Mill Lane. The name itself sounded like something from a ghost story. The asphalt disappeared completely, replaced by a bumpy, uneven dirt track. My car, a city car used to smooth pavement, bounced and rattled unhappily, kicking up a plume of brown dust behind me. The lane was narrow, with thorny branches from the overgrown bushes on either side scraping against my windows, making a terrible scratching sound. I felt a primal urge to turn back to flee this desolate, forgotten place and return to the safety of my life. But I couldn't. I had come too far. Then my phone's calm voice announced, "You have arrived." I pulled my car to a stop at the end of the lane and killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute and deafening. And there it was, the house. It was worse, so much worse, than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just old, it was decaying. It sagged under the weight of its own neglect, a sad, skeletal structure at the edge of the woods. The white paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing the dark, weather-beaten wood beneath, which looked bruised and gray. The front porch tilted at a dangerous angle, and one of the support columns had rotted through at the base. The yard was a chaotic jungle of knee-high weeds and tangled, thorny vines that crawled up the side of the house like grasping fingers. 2 of the upstairs windows were boarded over with gray, splintering planks of wood. It looked utterly and completely abandoned. I sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. A wave of relief, quickly followed by confusion, washed over me. This had to be a mistake. It must be some old, derelict property Leo had invested in and forgotten about. No one could possibly be living here. It was uninhabitable. I was about to put the car in reverse, ready to retreat from this depressing scene, when my eyes caught something, a flicker of movement. In one of the downstairs windows, the one that wasn't boarded up, A grimy yellowed curtain had twitched. It moved just an inch, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift, but it was enough. Someone was inside. Someone had seen me. The air in the car suddenly felt thick and hard to breathe. The fear that had been a low hum in the back of my mind now roared to life, a cold, solid knot in my stomach. This wasn't a mistake. This was the place, and whatever secret it held, it was a dark one. My determination battled with my terror. I had to know the truth. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I opened the car door and stepped out into the heavy, oppressive silence. Every step up the crumbling walkway felt monumental, as if I was walking towards an unavoidable, life-shattering destiny. The house loomed over me, a silent, watchful guardian of a terrible secret, and I knew with every fiber of my being that the person I was when I knocked on that door would not be the same person who walked away. My feet felt like they were encased in lead as I moved up the crumbling stone path. Every snap of a twig under my shoes sounded like a gunshot in the profound, eerie silence. My heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs, so loud I was sure the entire world could hear it. The front door, with its peeling green paint and tarnished brass knob, looked like a gateway to a forgotten world. I raised my hand to knock, but my courage failed me. I was terrified of who might answer, of what truths might be waiting on the other side of that splintered wood. What if Leo was right? What if his parents were bitter and angry people who would scream at me for daring to disturb them? Instead of knocking, I found myself drawn to the side of the house, towards the single downstairs window that wasn't boarded over. The glass was caked with years of dirt and grime, but there was a small, clear patch near the corner, as if someone had recently wiped it clean to peer out. Holding my breath, I crept closer, my shoes sinking into the soft, damp earth. I leaned in, pressing my face as close to the glass as I dared, and peered through the small opening into the gloom within. The sight that met my eyes stole the air from my lungs and sent an icy shard of dread straight into my heart. It was a scene of such stark and desolate misery that it felt like something from a nightmare. The room was almost completely empty. There was no warmth, no comfort, no sign that this was a place where people actually lived. A single, bare bulb hung from a wire in the ceiling, casting a weak, sallow light over a small, rickety wooden table and two mismatched chairs. A thin, threadbare rug lay on the floor, its colors faded to a uniform gray. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on a shelf, no television or radio. It wasn't a living room, it was a holding cell. And in that cell sat two people, an elderly man and woman, both so frail and thin they looked as if a strong gust of wind might carry them away. The man, with thinning white hair and a face etched with deep lines of worry, was staring at the front door with a raw, hunted expression. His hands were clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists on the table, as if he were bracing himself for an imminent blow. The woman sat across from him, her posture slumped in utter defeat. She was staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper on the far wall, her eyes vacant and hollow, as if the person behind them had left a long, long time ago. They were dressed in old, worn-out clothing that hung loosely on their skeletal frames. This was the terrifying discovery. This was the secret Leo was hiding. It wasn't a story of bitter resentment and family drama. It was a story of horrifying neglect. These were not the wealthy, controlling people from his stories who had disowned their successful son out of spite. These were prisoners, forgotten and isolated, wasting away in a derelict house in the middle of nowhere. A wave of nausea and cold, sickening realization washed over me. The truth was infinitely worse, infinitely more cruel than any lie I could have possibly imagined. A new feeling replaced my fear, a hot, righteous anger, anger at Leo for his monstrous deception, and a fierce protective urge to help these two broken people. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I forced my legs to move. I walked back to the front of the house and stood before the peeling green door. This time, I didn't hesitate. I balled my hand into a fist and knocked. the sound loud and startling in the heavy silence. I heard a sharp, indrawn breath from inside, followed by the sound of a chair scraping against the wooden floor. Slow, shuffling footsteps, hesitant and weak, approached the door. A series of clicks and scrapes followed as multiple locks were undone. The door creaked open just a few inches, held in place by a tarnished brass chain. A pair of terrified blue eyes, faded and watery, peered out at me. It was the man from the table. He looked even older and more fragile up close. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice a dry, raspy rustle of sound, as if he hadn't used it for a very long time. My own voice came out as a choked whisper. "Hello, my name is Clara. I'm I'm looking for Arthur and Eleanor." The man's eyes widened, and he seemed to shrink back from the small opening, a flicker of panic crossing his face. He glanced nervously past me, scanning the empty dirt lane behind me as if he expected to see a car, a threat, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I, I'm Leo's fiancé, I added, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. At the mention of Leo's name, the man flinched as if I had physically struck him. A look of pure, undiluted terror washed over his features. He stumbled back a step, his hand flying to the door to slam it shut. This wasn't the reaction of a father who was angry with his son. It was the gut-wrenching reaction of a victim who was terrified of his abuser. "Please," I begged, my own voice cracking with emotion as I pushed gently against the door. "Please don't close the door. I don't understand what's happening, but I promise I'm here to help. Please just let me in." He froze, his hand hovering over the door chain. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, his frightened eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. He seemed to be waging a silent internal war between a lifetime of fear and a tiny, desperate flicker of hope. Finally, with a trembling hand that seemed to betray him, he slowly, painstakingly unhooked the chain. The door swung open with a mournful groan. "He will be so angry," the man, Arthur, whispered, his voice filled with a dreadful certainty, as he let me step across the threshold, out of the fading light and into the cold, oppressive darkness of the house. Stepping into the house felt like stepping into a tomb. The air was cold, still, and thick with the musty smell of damp and decay. The faint light from the open door did little to penetrate the gloom. Arthur closed the door behind me, the sound of the locks clicking back into place, echoing like the closing of a cell door. He led me into the bare room I had seen through the window, his feet shuffling across the floorboards. The woman, who I now knew was Eleanor, didn't look up as I entered. She remained a statue of sorrow at the table, her gaze fixed on the stained wall. "Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice gentle and trembling as he placed a frail hand on her shoulder. "We have a visitor. She says she knows Leo." Eleanor turned her head with a slow, mechanical motion. Her eyes, the same shade of faded blue as her husband's, were empty and clouded over, as if she were looking right through me. A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled, hollowed cheek, but her expression didn't change. I felt a profound, aching sadness for her, for the light that had been so cruelly extinguished. I pulled out the other chair from the table and sat down, my body trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The wood was cold and hard beneath me. "I don't understand," I began, my voice barely a whisper, as I looked from Arthur's terrified face to Eleanor's vacant one. "Leo told me a story. He said that you were angry with him for not joining the family business. He said you cut him off, that you disowned him." Arthur let out a short, harsh, breathless sound. It wasn't a laugh. It was the sound of a heart breaking all over again. "He told you that, did he?" he rasped, shaking his head slowly. "Our boy Leo, he was always good at telling stories." He sank back into his own chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if for support. And then the true story, the horrifying, unvarnished truth, came spilling out in a torrent of quiet, desperate words. He told me about the family in the photograph I'd found, a family full of love, pride, and laughter. They had owned a small, successful hardware store in their hometown, a business they had built from the ground up. They weren't wealthy, but they had been comfortable, and they had saved diligently their entire lives for a peaceful retirement. They had adored their son, their brilliant, charming Leo. They had believed he could do anything, and that, he explained, was their undoing. A few years ago, Leo came to us, Arthur said, his voice cracking. He was working for that big investment firm in the city, making a name for himself. He told us we were fools to keep our life savings in a simple bank account. He said he could make our money work for us, that he could double it in a year. He showed us charts and graphs, used all these big financial words we didn't understand. Arthur looked down at his own gnarled, trembling hands. We trusted him. He was our son. We gave him everything. He told me how Leo had convinced them to liquidate all their assets, the business, their house, their savings, and give him power of attorney to invest it all in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For a few months, they received statements showing incredible returns. They felt like they were on top of the world, so proud of their brilliant boy. Then the statements stopped coming. When they asked, Leo told them there had been a market correction, a sudden and catastrophic downturn. It was all gone, every last cent. We were destroyed, Arthur whispered, tears now streaming freely down his face. We had lost everything. We were so ashamed we couldn't face anyone we knew. Leo had swooped in then, playing the role of the dutiful, caring son. He told them not to worry, that he would take care of them. He found this house for them, telling them it was a temporary, affordable rental where they could hide away from the world and get back on their feet. Grateful and broken, they had agreed, but once they were here, the trap was sprung. He told us that because of the bankruptcy, everything had to be in his name for legal reasons. Arthur continued, his voice thick with the memory of the betrayal. He took our bank cards, our IDs, our cell phones. He promised he'd get us new ones, but they never came. He told us not to contact any of our old friends or family because it would just bring up the shame of what had happened. He said he was protecting us. They were completely and utterly trapped. He wasn't protecting them. He was isolating them. He had become their sole connection to the outside world, their jailer. The meager groceries delivered once a week were paid for by Leo. The rent for this hovel, the $450 I saw on our statement, was likely being drawn from the last dregs of their own money that he still controlled. The man I was going to marry, the man I loved, had not been abandoned by his parents. He had systematically robbed them, stripped them of their money, their freedom, and their dignity, and then buried them alive in this forgotten house so no one would ever discover his monstrous crime. He had built his perfect life on the ruins of theirs. I looked over at Eleanor. She was now weeping silently, her thin shoulders shaken. The blankness was gone, replaced by a raw, bottomless grief. The story he had told me, the lie about the one unbreakable rule, it wasn't to protect his feelings. It was to protect his secret. It was a wall he had built around his prisoners to ensure no one ever came looking for them, and I had been about to become another brick in that wall. The drive back to the city was a silent 3-hour scream. The world outside my car windows, the trees, the sky, the passing cars, seemed blurry and unreal. The only thing that felt real was the cold, hard knot of fury in my stomach and the devastating clarity in my mind. The man I had been planning to spend my life with, the man whose child I had dreamed of having, was not just a liar, he was a monster, a smiling, charming monster who had built his entire world on a foundation of cruelty and deceit. The fairy tale was over. The beautiful castle he had built for us was nothing more than a prison, just a prettier version of the one he kept his parents in. When I finally walked back into our sun-drenched apartment, the place I had once called home, it felt like I was breaking into a stranger's house. Every object, the plush cream rug we'd picked out together, the photos of us laughing on the mantelpiece, the floral magazines still scattered on the floor, was a prop in a lie. The air was thick with the ghost of a love that had never been real. I didn't cry. The shock and sadness had been burned away by a cold, resolute anger. I knew, with absolute certainty, what I had to do. I couldn't just leave. Leaving would be an escape for me, but it wouldn't be justice for Arthur and Eleanor. I had to tear his world down, just as he had torn down theirs. My movements were calm and methodical. I went directly to his office and turned on his laptop. My hands were steady as I navigated to his financial files, to the accounts he managed for his parents. The statements were all there, a digital record of his crime. I saw the initial large deposit of their life savings, followed by a series of reckless, high-risk trades, and then the devastating losses. But I also saw something else, large regular transfers from their dwindling accounts into one of his own personal accounts, disguised with cryptic labels. He hadn't just lost their money, he had actively stolen it. I used my phone to take clear, damning pictures of every single transaction. Evidence. Next, I went into our bedroom. I pulled a suitcase from the top of the closet, the same closet where I'd found the photo album that started it all. I didn't pack everything. I just took the things that were truly mine, my clothes, my books, the sentimental trinkets from my own family that predated him. I packed the life I had before Leo, the life I was going to reclaim. Finally, I sat down on the couch and made 2 phone calls. The first was to the local police department in Willow Creek. My voice was calm and clear as I explained the situation, reporting a case of elder abuse and financial exploitation. I gave them the address on Old Mill Lane. The second call was to the state's Adult Protective Services hotline. I told them the same story, my heart aching as I described the conditions Arthur and Eleanor were living in. They both assured me they would send someone to the house immediately. Help was on the way. I had just hung up when I heard his key in the lock. My heart gave a single hard thud, but I remained perfectly still. He walked in, his face beaming, holding a beautiful bouquet of my favorite flowers, stargazer lilies. The sight of them, a gesture that once would have made me melt, now made my stomach churn. "Hey, honey, how was your day with Jenna?" he asked, his voice full of that practiced, loving warmth. He leaned in to kiss me. I turned my face away, and the cold, hard plastic of my phone pressed against my cheek. He froze, the smile faltering on his lips as he finally saw the look on my face. "I didn't visit Jenna today, Leo," I said, my voice quiet and devoid of all emotion. A flicker of confusion, then alarm, crossed his face. "Oh, where did you go?" Then I stood up and faced him, letting him see the complete absence of love in my eyes. "I went to Willow Creek," I said. "I met your parents." It was like watching a mask shatter. The handsome, charming face contorted, twisting into an ugly snarl of disbelief and pure, undiluted rage. His skin went pale. "You did what?" He spat, the words dripping with venom. He dropped the flowers onto the floor. "They told me everything, Leo," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "The money, the house, the lies, all of it." He took a menacing step towards me, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He was trying to intimidate me, to use the anger that had always worked before. "They're old and confused. They're sick. They don't know what they're talking about. You had no right to go behind my back and interfere in my family's private business." But I wasn't the same woman he had kissed goodbye that morning. I was no longer scared of him. I saw him for what he was, a pathetic, hollow man. I held up my phone, showing him the pictures of his bank statements. "The only person who is confused is you if you think you're going to get away with this. And the only person who is sick is you." Just then, a sound began to cut through the night, a distant siren growing steadily louder. His eyes widened in dawning horror as he realized what the sound meant. "I called the police, Leo," I said calmly, "and Adult Protective Services. They're on their way to that house right now to get your parents, to finally set them free." His face crumpled, the rage replaced by a desperate, panicked fear. He looked like a cornered animal, his lies and manipulations finally failing him. I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering sadness, just the clean, quiet satisfaction of justice. I walked over to the dining room table. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the heavy diamond engagement ring from my finger. It felt like I was removing a shackle. I placed it on the polished wood, its sparkle looking obscene in the suddenly harsh light of the room. "It's over," I said. Then I turned, picked up my suitcase, and walked to the door, leaving him standing amidst the ruins of the perfect life he had built on the suffering of others. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the siren now screaming through the city streets, I didn't feel a single pang of loss for the future I was leaving behind. I felt only relief. I was escaping the nightmare, and Arthur and Eleanor were too. We were all finally free.